all the way from Mombasa to Malaba. I suddenly saw an amount of just Mombasa to Nairobi, somebody parachuting a project that had become government under the Uhuru government of 380 billion. Just Mombasa to Nairobi. That project from Mombasa to Naivasha costed for what were called the original construction plus rolling stock amounted to 500 billion shillings. So just to give you a summary. So the cost of the project is 500 billion. Chinese Exim Bank, that's the Chinese debt, say we are going to loan the Kenya government a total of 90% of that money. So Kenyans, you must raise 10%. 10% of 500 is 50 billion shillings. So us from our hard-earned taxes must pay 10% before they pay the 90%. So we did an audit of these amounts. It's part of our debt audit. We did an audit. What happened? Did the Chinese give us all the money that they said? Yes, they did. They gave all the money. It was paid directly to China Road and Bridge Company. The 90%. So did Kenyans raise the 50 billion, which was 10% of 500, right? And did they contribute their share of 10%? We did the sums. Now, on the loan part, I want you to remember we are servicing that loan at very expensive rates. In fact, this coming month, there's a big bill coming up. Now, did we raise the 50 billion as our contribution of 10%? So we did the numbers, right? And it's called Self-Raising Finance, SGR grant from the Treasury. So 50 billion was supposed to move from Treasury to Kenya Railways and then to the contractor called China Road and Bridge. So we just did the math. Eric, it was not 50 billion that was paid. It was 644 billion shillings that came out of the Treasury to go to Kenya Railways, to then go to China Road and Bridge as self-raising finance for a project worth 500 billion. So we paid for it with our own money and even more. And yet we took a loan and we are paying back that loan. China Road and Bridge for the building of SGR from Mombasa to Naivasha was paid a total of almost 1.2 trillion for a project of 500 billion, according to the contract documents. So 700 billion above what was required. That is a frightening fact. Then you come to something called domestic debt. Don't you hear bonds and bills taken from our local banks, insurance companies, pension funds? This amount of the total debt we're talking about, almost 11 trillion, today stands at 5.1 trillion. 800 from our pension funds, 700 from insurance companies, the rest from banks. In other words, it's our deposits, the Kenyans' deposit in our banks, that the banks have decided to take to the Treasury, loan to the Treasury, and then our taxes pay them their huge interest rates. So you can see where you see some bank CEOs earning humongous amounts of bonuses and all sorts of amounts like 300-400 million shillings a year. This is why our money going to our government and our taxes paying for all these banks to make humongous profits at our expense. You and I try and borrow, we are told to borrow at 25%. They are loaning to the government at 16%. It is a monumental fraud because, again, there is nowhere in our appropriations bills, revenue, that you can say, this money, look at bonds. The other day they took an infrastructure bond of 200 and something billion shillings. I think it was February. What infrastructure on the budget was being funded? Nothing. Nothing. These bonds and bills have funded nothing in our budget. And yet, do you know how much interest we have paid for 5.1 trillion over 10 years? We have paid them a total of 2.7 trillion in interest payments. This is criminality beyond your imagination. And there are some key banks here that have perpetuated this fraud. KCB, Cooperative Bank, Equity Bank. Those are three banks that have perpetuated a very clear fraud on the Kenyan public, us as depositors, and us as taxpayers, and made humongous profits, become oligarchs against the sovereign, against us. And we must start saying, we're not going to take this rubbish anymore. And this rubbish goes this way. If you have deposits in those banks, if your parents have deposits in those banks, we should pull them out tomorrow, not today, not yesterday, not the day after, tomorrow, if not today. Remove that money. Take it to banks that are not defrauding us. Because what is happening there is a fraud of the highest proportions. I want to go back to the London Club debts. These bonds, Euro bonds, these syndicated bonds, these syndicated loans, none of those appear on the budget. But one underlying fact you will find is that somewhere along the way, like you saw recently with the latest payments of Eurobond, the last payment of Eurobond was paid 500 so-called billion balance, right, of the 2 billion we had borrowed. That was paid by World Bank, IMF. Why are they underwriting money that never came to us? Who is this that they are backing? So here they are. They encourage us to take those very expensive loans, knowing full well they are not on a budget. And then when we can't pay, IMF comes up and it starts rattling. Oh, we can save you, but these are the conditions. And the conditions become a matter they become a matter of our slavery. Now, all this information I'm giving is in the public domain. Our forensic audit is in the public domain. We got it from public documents. We are not trying to create new documentation. And we've been speaking this for the last 2 years. Kenyans need to understand categorically that we are in a mode of slavery. And I'll perpetuate this slavery by going back to the point where we were saying today, 80% of our tax revenue is going to one item called debt. These debts I'm talking about, and which we have already paid for. We don't owe, but we are going to keep being made to pay unless we cut off this chain because it is illegal. We do not owe it. This coming financial year, 2024-2025, the estimate from the Treasury of debt payments, keeping the current exchange rate, is 1.853164. In other words, 1.853 trillion shillings is going towards the debt payments this financial year of 2024-2025. You come to the year 2025-2026, it is 2.2 trillion to be paid to debt payments. You go to the next year, 2026-2027, is 2.352. And remember, we are getting what you call diminishing returns on our revenue, the Laffer curve, which is the maximum you can squeeze out of us. There is no item in our budget that is taking so much money. People are complaining about confidential funds of 700 million shillings. Look at this year. You tell me which item is taking over 1.8 trillion, one single item in debt payments, in any payment. Nothing is doing that. Nothing at all. This is the tragedy that we are living in. We are in slavery. And we are in such slavery that William Ruto is soon going to come and tell us that he can no longer pay it. And that we have been unable to pay it because, you people rejected the finance bill. Now I cannot raise revenue. So now I have to default on this payment. And the default means that they now start coming to your accounts. They start looking for your deposits. And they start telling you that you've got to take a share of this. Otherwise, the banks will close. And we're going to have serious problems here. Ghana went through this. And Ghana are suffering today. They are suffering from 2022 December, where 70% 70 shillings of every 100 went to debt. They are suffering. And I can tell you, it is so tragic because you go back to the London Club debts. You go back to these so-called Mzungus guy that he's talking about. These criminals that have perpetuated this fraud even in places like Malaysia and gotten caught. These big firms called JP Morgan Chase. They have been part of a conspiracy because if you are going to loan anybody money, the first thing you must do is your due diligence. What are you giving this money for? Is it in line with the laws of Kenya? Which project is being funded? The Euro bond that was taken in 2013. Our investigation is very clear on this. It started an investigation all the way back in 2014. When I can tell you here on this show, a man called Jacob Juma, the late, he was my friend, came to visit me. And he tells me, Jimmy, I can tell you there's something fishy going on here. And all he was just simply reading what are called the Ministry, the National Treasury quarterly reports. That is all. And he said, the president stood up when he said he's taking the Eurobond. And he said, because he's taking the Eurobond, they are not going to borrow domestically. The estimate at the time was about 300 billion shillings. So 3 billion almost euro, a Eurobond that was taken. But when I look at the quarterly reports from the National Treasury, it seems they still borrow domestically from the local banks. And that's their quarterly report, not the budget, quarterly report. And they are not recording what happened to the Eurobond. So we started asking some questions. Unfortunately, we got the opposition leader, Raila Amolo Odinga at the time, to write a letter to the Treasury to ask where are these Euro bonds? The 2 billion you say you borrowed, what has happened to it? On a bit of a scare for the then Minister of Finance called Rotich, he released documentation. And he showed the following. That $1 billion, they went out into the market and they managed to get $2 billion early 2014. In fact, by May 2014. And that $2 billion, they showed us what is called the expenditure pattern of those dollars. So they said, one of the first 1 billion, $650 million of that money went to pay a syndicated loan of Mwai Kibaki directly to a bank called Barclays Bank, in fact, Standard Chartered, sorry. And they showed us a SWIFT transfer of that amount. Then a SWIFT transfer is to show, like you get an RTGS that shows from point A to point B, it went to the account and was credited. Then they showed us that 350 balance of that first $1 billion, it went directly to the consolidated fund, exchequer account 00010,3987. And they showed us very clearly that account. 350 credited. We said, hallelujah, asante sana. Very good work. Then we said, where is the second one? They said, oh, the second one, we hung on to until September of that year. We don't know why they asked JP Morgan Chase to hang on to that. But they said it also came. We said, show us, like you showed us of the 350, show us this amount of 1 billion, how it came to the Treasury. Said, because the 350 came to the Treasury, came to the central bank, account number 1, it showed categorically that you had a SWIFT transfer, you even had a letter from CK to Treasury showing the exchange rate confirmation that you transferred to Kenya shillings. Sure, for this $1 billion in December. He sent and put up a SWIFT transfer. That SWIFT transfer did not show $15 billion. Right? That did not $15 billion. They showed it came to an account they had now created in the central bank called a sovereign wealth account, some 10,12674 account, not the consolidated fund. We said, and then they showed us the communication from the central bank saying we have created this amount, the Eurobond, done by Edward Auko. And Edward Auko, in his report, says that this amount entered an account called 8,214 something. We said, what account is this? We don't know it. We don't know it at all. What is this account? We never got a further explanation. But nobody dared to present even one iota of that SWIFT transfer like they had done for the others. Even the letter exchanging the amount from dollars to cash shillings, central bank saying this is the exchange value of the editions. What we know is that that money not provided evidence that it entered this country. Now, the Auditor General in his report further goes to say that all these amounts cannot be attached to any project. And actually, even in his conclusion, says that when he asked the Treasury, what were these monies so-called used for? The Treasury says that these funds are fungible. In other words, they are changeable. They can do what they want with them. In other words, they admit that they are breaking the law. That is just